Now we're going to be talking about aggregate supply, kind of one of my favorite components of economics and macroeconomics especially. An aggregate supply is talking about the total supply of goods and services in a given time period. Okay, so how much can we supply essentially? And there's three different types of aggregate supply, so I'll run through them quite quickly. And we've got the short run aggregate supply. So these two here, they're basically kind of classicalist models, and just know that for now. And we have two kind of schools of thought. We've got the classicalist free market economists, and we've got the Keynesian economists, which are the government intervention, pro-government intervention economists. I'm going to explain the three different types of aggregate supply curves here. Firstly, we have the short run aggregate supply curve, and what that's representing here, it basically represents, it's an upward sloping curve, and it signifies a relationship between the price level and aggregate supply, especially in the short run. Now, what does it basically mean, which we're going to talk about here now. And the short run aggregate supply, it basically, just think of it this way. Essentially, it's to do with costs. 90% of the time, it's going to be to do with cost of production. When you hear about it, it's to do with cost of production. Okay, upward sloping, positive relationship with the price level and real GDP. Okay, so if your costs of your raw materials, your wages, your rents, the interest rates that you're paying on your loans are increased, this makes it more expensive to produce. Okay, if you're importing, for example, cotton, and you're a clothing manufacturer, and cotton is your main material, the cost of producing those jogging bottoms and those tracksuits or those suits, etc., are going to be higher, and thus your costs rise. And if your costs rise as an economy as a whole, or each individual company, what's going to happen to your supply? And especially in the short run, your costs are going to rise. And that means there's going to be an leftward shift or an inward shift, as we call it, of the short run aggregate supply curve. So remember, it's to do with costs. Now, if interest rates, for example, fall, great. The cost of borrowing for my loans that I've used to invest in projects, in building new buildings, etc., amazing, is much cheaper now. That means I can supply more at a cheaper rate. Great. That's amazing. And that's what we want. That's the kind of review that we're going to have here. Okay, and all of this will be clearer when we bring aggregate demand into the equation. What else influences short-run aggregate supply? Again, government intervention. Higher taxes means lower profits. A tax is a cost, essentially, so withdrawal away from the local economy. So there's going to be lower additional funding for production. And this shifts the AS curve, so the SRAS curve, to the left again, and it's going inwards. And what that means is your cost of productions are going to be much higher. There are less government subsidies as well. Imagine if the government don't give you as many subsidies, or let's say they do. Let's talk about it in an example where they do. So imagine the government increased subsidies. So these are grants given to firms. And this will basically mean that you can produce goods at a lower cost. And if you can produce goods at lower cost, again, what does that mean for your short-run aggregate supply? We're going to shift it to the right. It's going to be an outward shift, which means you can produce more at lower costs. Okay. Thirdly, we have investment. Lower investments could reduce the level of SRAS. Why? Why could they do this? So if investments fall, so remember I is part of aggregate demand, that means you're spending less on things like maybe machinery. And if you're not spending, so let's say like a combine harvester for a farmer, if you're not investing in a combine harvester, what's that going to mean for the cost of producing or picking the barley or the wheat or the rice from the fields or your crops? It's going to be a lot longer, and you're going to have to hire a lot more people, which is going to cost you a lot more. And therefore, what normally happens, costs go up, as I mentioned, and therefore aggregate supply, short run, aggregate supply is going to go down. And it's going to shift again, an inward shift. Migration, in terms of the costs, how does this impact in the short run? If local skilled migrants work abroad, the economy may partially experience a brain drain, which could affect the production negatively, resulting in a reduction in the SRAS. So imagine if you've got a lot of emigration, so a lot of individuals are leaving. So let's say a lot of your doctors are leaving to go to another country to work. What's going to happen is potentially you're going to have a shortage of workers. And if you have a shortage, any form of shortage of workers, that basically means you're going to have excess demand. And what you're going to do in the short run especially is you're going to try and find loads and loads of individuals or potential employees from other countries, and you're going to entice them to come and work for you. And thus this has happened a lot in the United Arab Emirates countries, where they entice people like doctors, or job roles like doctors, bankers, lawyers, etc., with very high wages, because they don't have enough or expertise, especially in those industries, and therefore they have to get it from other countries. And the way they do that is they entice them with very high wages, sometimes 3 times the amount usually. And therefore this results in a massive cost increase. So remember, an increase in SRAS means a shift to the right. A decrease in SRAS means a shift to the left. Alright? Remember, costs. SRAS is to do with costs. Don't forget that.